Good morning, and welcome to the Daily Signal. I'm your host, Remo, and it's Friday, June 6th, 2025. Today, we're tracking some significant developments from around the globe that are shaping our world. We'll start with escalating tensions as Ukraine faces intensified Russian retaliation, while diplomatic efforts continue to search for solutions. We're also following mysterious developments near North Korea's coast, new leadership challenges in the Middle East, and a remarkable engineering achievement that's finally connecting Kashmir to the rest of India by rail after decades of work. From geopolitical tensions to technological marvels, today's stories remind us how interconnected our world has become and how quickly things can change. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into what's happening around the world that matters to all of us. Let's begin with breaking developments from Eastern Europe. Ukrainian cities are facing intensified bombardment from Russian forces in what appears to be direct retaliation for a significant drone strike that reached deep into Russian territory. The escalation represents a concerning shift in the ongoing conflict. Ukrainian officials report that multiple civilian areas have been targeted, causing casualties and significant infrastructure damage. What makes this particularly troubling is the apparent timing. These strikes came just hours after Ukraine successfully conducted one of its most ambitious drone operations to date, hitting military targets far from the front lines. For those following this conflict, this pattern of escalation and counter-escalation has become worryingly familiar. But what's different this time is the scale and the clear message being sent by Moscow. Military analysts suggest this represents Russia's attempt to deter future long-range strikes by demonstrating the civilian cost of such operations. For millions of Ukrainians, this means another day of seeking shelter, another day of uncertainty about basic services like electricity and water. It's a stark reminder that while diplomatic efforts continue around the world, the human cost of this conflict continues to mount daily. Now, let's turn to a puzzling development from the waters near North Korea. Maritime experts are scratching their heads over mysterious balloons spotted floating near Kim Jong-un's recently capsized warship, raising questions about what exactly is happening in one of the world's most secretive nations. The balloons, described by satellite imagery analysts as unusually large and numerous, appeared shortly after the North Korean naval vessel experienced what officials called a training accident. But here's what's got experts intrigued. The balloons don't match any known North Korean military equipment or standard rescue operations. Some intelligence analysts speculate these could be related to data recovery efforts, possibly trying to retrieve sensitive equipment from the sunken vessel. Others suggest they might be part of a previously unknown surveillance or communication system. Now, when it comes to North Korea, we're often working with limited information, but this incident highlights just how much we still don't know about the country's military capabilities. For regional security experts, any unusual activity near North Korean military assets is worth watching closely. Moving to U.S. politics and foreign policy, former President Trump made headlines yesterday with controversial comments about the Ukraine conflict, suggesting it might be better to let Ukraine and Russia fight for a while, rather than pursue immediate diplomatic solutions. These remarks have sparked intense debate about America's role in international conflicts and what U.S. foreign policy might look like under different leadership. Trump's comments came during a campaign event where he criticized current aid packages to Ukraine and suggested that sometimes conflicts need to burn themselves out. Critics immediately responded, arguing that this approach would only prolong civilian suffering and potentially embolden authoritarian regimes worldwide. Supporters, however, see this as evidence of Trump's preference for non-interventionist policies that prioritize American interests. What's particularly significant here is how these comments reveal the ongoing divide in American politics about international engagement. For our global audience, it's worth noting that these debates about America's role abroad affect not just U.S. domestic policy, but have real implications for international alliances and conflicts worldwide. The timing is especially notable given the escalating situation we just discussed in Ukraine. Staying with U.S. domestic issues, Advocacy groups in Minnesota are speaking out against what they're calling cruel travel restrictions that echo previous immigration policies. The Minnesota Advocacy Group argues these measures disproportionately affect families and asylum seekers from specific regions. The policy debate centers around screening processes and travel documentation requirements that advocates say create unnecessary hardships for legitimate travelers and immigrants. State officials defend the measures as necessary security protocols, but community organizations report cases of families being separated or delayed for extended periods. This story reflects broader national conversations happening across the United States about balancing security concerns with humanitarian obligations. For immigrant communities nationwide, these policies represent very real impacts on their ability to travel, work, and reunite with family members. What makes Minnesota's situation particularly interesting is how state and federal policies intersect, sometimes creating conflicts between local community values and national security directives. Turning to the Middle East, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has taken another serious turn. The Global Humanitarian Foundation has been forced to suspend operations at multiple aid distribution sites following shootings and direct attacks. Meanwhile, Israeli military operations in Jabalia have resulted in at least 10 civilian casualties. This development is particularly concerning because it affects the already limited humanitarian aid reaching the region's most vulnerable populations. The Global Humanitarian Foundation, which has been providing critical food and medical supplies, cited safety concerns for their international staff and local volunteers. The situation in Jabalia represents the ongoing challenges of providing humanitarian assistance in active conflict zones. Local residents report that basic necessities like clean water, medical supplies, and food are becoming increasingly scarce as aid organizations struggle to operate safely. For the international community, this raises difficult questions about how to deliver essential humanitarian aid when traditional methods become too dangerous. The suspension of aid operations means that approximately 50,000 residents in affected areas will have even more limited access to basic necessities. This story underscores a troubling pattern we're seeing globally: humanitarian workers and civilians bearing the cost of military conflicts, making it harder to address urgent human needs even in the midst of political disputes. Speaking of international legal matters, we're seeing new tensions between the United States and international judicial institutions. Senator Marco Rubio has announced new sanctions targeting the International Criminal Court, specifically in response to the ICC's actions involving both U.S. and Israeli officials. The sanctions represent a significant escalation in the ongoing dispute between the United States and the ICC over jurisdiction and accountability issues. Rubio's office argues that the court has overstepped its authority and is targeting democratic nations unfairly. Now, this might sound like inside-the-beltway politics, but it actually has broader implications for international law and cooperation. The ICC was established to prosecute individuals for international crimes when national courts are unwilling or unable to do so. Critics of the sanctions argue that this undermines international legal frameworks that took decades to establish. Supporters see it as protecting national sovereignty from what they view as judicial overreach. For countries around the world, this tension between national sovereignty and international accountability remains one of the most challenging aspects of global governance in the 21st century. In Eastern Europe, there's a developing story that's caught the attention of regional security experts. Reports from Meduza, the independent Russian news outlet, describe a situation where local officials are saying we're right at the epicenter of what appears to be escalating regional tensions. While details remain limited due to information restrictions in the region, the language suggests this could be related to broader geopolitical pressures affecting communities along contested borders. Independent journalists report increased military activity and heightened security measures in several areas. What's particularly noteworthy is how this phrase, right at the epicenter, suggests local officials are acknowledging their communities are bearing the direct impact of larger political conflicts. For residents in these areas, this means dealing with uncertainty about basic security, potential disruptions to daily life, and the stress of living in what military analysts call gray zones, areas where political control and safety can shift rapidly. Back to the Middle East, Israeli forces have conducted strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs, targeting what military officials describe as Hezbollah drone manufacturing facilities. The operation represents a significant escalation in the ongoing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah, the Lebanese militant group. Israeli officials argue these strikes are necessary to prevent the development of drone capabilities that could threaten civilian areas. Lebanese authorities report that the strikes caused significant damage to residential areas surrounding the alleged targets, raising concerns about civilian casualties. Hezbollah has not yet responded publicly to the specific allegations about drone production facilities. For residents of Beirut's southern suburbs, this means living with the constant possibility of military action in their neighborhoods. The area has a dense civilian population, making any military operations particularly risky for non-combatants. This incident also highlights the growing importance of drone technology in regional conflicts and how these relatively inexpensive weapons systems are changing military calculations throughout the Middle East. Now for some positive news about human achievement and engineering excellence. After decades of planning and construction, India has completed a remarkable railway line connecting Kashmir to the rest of the country, a project that engineers are calling one of the most challenging infrastructure achievements of the modern era. The new rail line had to overcome incredible geographic obstacles, including some of the world's most difficult mountain terrain, extreme weather conditions, and complex geological challenges. Engineers built bridges that span vast valleys and tunnels that cut through some of the hardest rock formations on Earth. What makes this story so compelling isn't just the technical achievement, though that's impressive enough. It's what this means for the people of Kashmir. For the first time, residents will have reliable, year-round transportation connections that aren't dependent on weather conditions or road accessibility. This railway will transform economic opportunities in the region, making it easier for businesses to transport goods, for students to access education, and for families to stay connected despite the challenging geography. The project employed thousands of workers over more than 2 decades and represents the kind of long-term infrastructure investment that can fundamentally change people's lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the most important news isn't about conflicts or politics, but about human ingenuity solving real problems. Finally, a story from Australia that's captured international attention for its unusual and tragic circumstances. In an ongoing trial, a cook is testifying about what she describes as preparing a special meal that allegedly led to multiple deaths from mushroom poisoning. The case involves a family lunch that turned deadly, with several relatives falling seriously ill after consuming what appeared to be a traditional family meal. The cook, who is facing serious criminal charges, described the meal as special, but maintains it was not intended to cause harm. Legal experts note that cases involving accidental versus intentional poisoning can be extremely complex, often requiring detailed forensic analysis of both the food preparation process and the specific types of mushrooms involved. For the families involved, this tragedy has torn apart what should have been a simple family gathering. The case has also raised awareness in Australia about the risks of foraging for wild mushrooms, even among people who consider themselves experienced. The trial continues, with investigators working to determine whether this was a tragic accident or something more deliberate. It's a reminder that sometimes the most shocking news comes from the most ordinary circumstances. And that brings us to the end of today's Daily Signal. As we wrap up this Friday, June 6th, I want to take a moment to reflect on the stories we've covered today. From Ukraine to North Korea, from the halls of American politics to the mountains of Kashmir, today's news reminds us that we live in a world where local actions can have global consequences, where decades of work can finally pay off, and where human ingenuity continues to solve seemingly impossible challenges. The tensions we're seeing in multiple regions, whether it's escalating conflicts, legal disputes, or humanitarian crises, underscore how much our world needs thoughtful leadership, international cooperation, and people who are willing to work towards solutions rather than just point out problems. But we also heard about remarkable achievements, like that railway line to Kashmir, which took decades to complete, but will improve lives for generations to come. These stories remind us that progress is possible, even when it takes patience and persistence. As you go into your weekend, I encourage you to think about how these global stories connect to your own community and your own life. In our interconnected world, understanding what's happening beyond our borders isn't just interesting, it's essential. Thanks for spending your morning with us. I'm Remo, and this has been the Daily Signal. We'll be back Monday morning with more stories from around the world that matter to all of us. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and have a great weekend.